Everyone thought it was funny when my grandfather forgot his own name, but he never forgot the way to my bed to remind me night after night that hell can live in the house. My name is Helen Louise Carter. I'm 76 years old and I'm from Mobile, Alabama. Everyone thought it was funny when my grandfather forgot his own name, but he never forgot the way to my bed to remind me night after night that hell can live in the house. I don't remember exactly how old I was, because there was a time when my head started to get mixed up, But I remember the smell of his talcum powder, and I remember the breathy, slightly sweet voice he used with me. It was different from the voice he used with the rest of the family. With me, he spoke as if he was telling a secret, as if we had some kind of pact. My grandfather was called Raymond Carter. Everyone called him Grandpa Ray. He'd been a widower for a long time, and my mother, his youngest daughter, decided to bring him to live with us after people said he was disoriented. And that's when it all started. My mother, poor thing, was busy. She worked as a nanny for other people and looked after the house. My father, well, he was always too tired to notice anything, the kind of man who only sees his own navel and thinks his daughter is his mother's problem. So Grandpa became my shadow, and nobody saw a problem with that because it was just Grandpa. Imagine, an old man with a weak head, what could he do? I tell you this with a bad taste in my mouth, because at that time I didn't even have the words to explain what I felt. It wasn't exactly fear. It was a mixture of disgust and confusion, and worse, guilt, because nobody told me it was wrong. So I thought I was the problem. The first night he came into my room was a Saturday. I was lying down holding my teddy bear, the one called Benny. I even had an eye missing from sleeping cuddled up to him. The hallway light was on and I saw Grandpa's shadow before I saw him. He came walking slowly, dragging his slippers, and sat on the edge of my bed. "Are you all right, little girl?" he asked, smiling with a soft mouth and his eyes shining strangely. I just shook my head. He ran his hand slowly through my hair, and then he stood there for too long. He said he was going to tell a story, but his voice became something else. The way he touched me wasn't the way any grandfather should touch. I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted him to go away. The next morning, he gave me a mint and called me a brave girl. And I, dumb as I was, thought that maybe I had done something right. But I didn't tell anyone, because honestly, who would believe me? Everyone said Grandpa was sick in the head, and I was just a child with too much imagination. The days turned into weeks, and he came more and more often. He never left a mark, never made a sound. He was like a ghost who knew exactly what he could do without being discovered. Once, my mother asked me why I was sleeping badly. She said I woke up sweating and screaming. I pretended it was a nightmare. She kissed me on the forehead and said she would pray for me, and at that moment, I wanted to tell her so much. But my voice wouldn't come out. It was as if something was holding me back inside. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was that invisible pact he made me feel we had. One night, which I've never forgotten, he came in and brought me a glass of milk. He said it was to calm me down. I didn't want to drink it, but he insisted. And when I took a sip, I tasted something strange. I felt dizzy and wanted to sleep, but my head stayed awake, and he stayed there, talking softly in my ear as if it were a bedtime story. But it wasn't. From then on, I started sleeping with the door locked. But my mother used to fight me about it. She said it was dangerous, that there could be a fire, that it was cool. So I gave in, and the door was open again. It didn't take long for my grandmother on my father's side to suspect something. She came to visit and saw me withdrawn, silent. It was she who asked, with that firm look on her face, "Is something wrong with you, Helen?" I shook my head no, but she didn't believe me. "If that old man is bothering you, you tell me. I'll finish him off," I said, almost whispering. It was the first time anyone had given me a sense of security, but it was also the first time I realized that maybe I wasn't crazy. And then my head started to split. School also became a torment. I couldn't pay attention to anything. The other children were laughing, running, and playing, and I just wanted to disappear. One day, a teacher caught me crying alone in the bathroom. She hugged me. She asked what was going on. I said I missed my dead grandmother. It was the only reason I could come up with. Little by little, my body began to understand what my mind was still denying. I began to feel angry, an anger that burned inside. It was no longer fear. It was the kind of hatred that only grows when you're forced to keep quiet for too long. But I didn't speak, not a peep, because every time he passed me in front of the others and winked that withered, disguised eye, I remembered. Nobody saw what I saw. And if no one saw, no one would believe me. And so it went for a long time. But one day, darling, one day, something broke. Leave your like, darling, because now that it started, it's going to be hard to close your eyes. I think it was in that autumn that my mother began to fade without realizing it. She still did everything she could to keep the house on track, but fatigue was in her eyes. One day, I saw her standing in the yard staring at nothing, her hands full of soap and the water overflowing from the basin. When I asked her what she was thinking, she just said, "Nothing, child," and went back inside with that heavy silence that can't be explained, only felt. It was during this time that Grandpa started to do something different. He stopped pretending so much during the day. He started to say a few disconnected sentences around other people, but when he passed me, he would mutter things that only I could hear. Things that made me sick to my stomach, and I couldn't react, because any expression on my face could arouse suspicion, and then I'd have to explain. And how do you explain something that you don't even have a name for? One night, I was pretending to sleep, my heart pounding in my neck, when I heard him drag his slippers down the corridor. Every step was a punch in the chest. And suddenly, he stopped. He stood there in the doorway looking at me. He didn't go in. He just looked. I felt it, even with my eyes closed. His presence filled the room like thick smoke. After a while, he left. The next day, he gave me a present, a hair clip that didn't even match me. He said it was so that I would remember him when he was no longer here. At that moment, I wanted to scream, not out of fear, but out of disgust, because he made it seem like it was all affection, that the terror I was enduring was proof of love. And I began to think that maybe I really was cursed. That could only be it, because a child that no one listens to, that everyone ignores, starts to think they're wrong just for existing. In the meantime, my mother was worried about the bills. We didn't have any luxuries, just the basics. And she thought that bringing Dad to live with us was an act of kindness. He doesn't have anyone, she said. He only has us. That hurt me more than anything, because I could see her effort, her attempt to be a good daughter, and at the same time, I felt buried alive. One day, after a dinner party, he dropped a glass on the floor. The shards flew and he started babbling, as if he didn't know what had happened. My father got up, cleaned up, and made a joke. "The old man is turning into a child." Everyone laughed, except me, because I knew he was faking it, that every forgetfulness was handpicked, because at night he remembered everything. He knew where I kept my toys, the names of my classmates, my shoe number, and he used every detail against me, as if it were a joke between us. One Sunday we went to church. The pastor was talking about sin and salvation. All I could think about was how good it would be to disappear. Not die, disappear, evaporate. At the same time, it was eating me up inside because I didn't think anyone there, not even God, could see me. And if he did, why did he let me? On the way back, he sat next to me in the back seat of the car. My mother drove, my father snored in the back seat, and he squeezed my knee with his coat-covered hand. He smiled, a small, cynical smile. I looked out of the window and kept counting the street lamps. I was distracted like that, thinking that if I got to 100, he would stop. But I stopped at 87 because he had already taken his hand away, as if he knew my inner game, as if he was playing with my limits. I even invented an illness. I said I had a stomachache, a headache, an eye ache. I wanted to sleep in my mother's room. Sometimes it worked. Other times, she said I needed to learn to sleep on my own, and I would lie there with my heart shrinking, the blanket up to my chin, and Benny hugging me so tightly that I almost tore the old fabric. The cruelest part of it all was realizing that I had nowhere to run, or to whom. My paternal grandmother didn't come around as much. My father was absent. My mother was blinded by love for that old man, and I was a child, trapped in a small house where no one listened to my silence. It was in this context that I started writing in an old notebook. I hid it under my sock drawer. I wrote what I felt, what I wanted to say, what I couldn't tell him. And one night I wrote, "Today, he said he loves me, and I wanted to throw up." I closed the notebook so tightly that it crumpled the cover. But it gave me relief. It was as if I was screaming on paper, since my mouth couldn't. And then Christmas came. The house full. My mother excited. The tree improvised with borrowed lights. Everyone laughing, hugging, taking photos. And there he was, like the grandfather from the margarine commercial, telling jokes, getting people's names wrong, handing out sweets to the neighborhood children. At night, when everyone was asleep and I could still taste the turkey in my mouth, he came in. I sat down on the bed before he got close. I looked him in the eye and said, "Get out." His voice came out shaky, but it came out. He stopped. He looked at me seriously, as if I had broken some secret rule. He didn't say anything. He turned and left. The next morning, he completely ignored me, as if I were invisible, and for the first time I felt a certain relief. But it didn't last, because when you live in fear, any respite feels like a trap. And it was, because what he did afterwards was worse. After that Christmas night, I started counting the days as if I were inside an invisible prison, and every hour was a punishment, because he stopped coming to my room, yes, but not because he'd given up. It was more like he was waiting for the victim to drop his guard, and I knew it, because there was a strange calm in his eyes, the kind that only those who think they're in charge of everything can maintain. My mother said he was getting better. "He's calmer, even more lucid," she commented with a small smile, like someone who is proud of a child who has improved at school. I pretended to agree, but inside I felt my hands closing on their own, because that was just the start of something worse. He started spending more time with me during the day. He'd sit near me while I watched cartoons. He'd ask about my notebooks. He wanted to know the names of my friends. And every question he asked came with a look that made me nauseous. It wasn't curiosity. It was control. He wanted to know how far I could go, what I was thinking, if I was still afraid. And I was. But I disguised it. One Saturday morning, my mother asked me to help him organize some old boxes in the back room. She said it was important, that he needed to throw things away. I hesitated. She frowned, so I went. Inside, the musty smell was strong. The boxes were full of paper, old photos, objects I didn't even remember seeing before. He closed the door slowly, as if he didn't want to make a sound. I turned around, pretended to go through things, and heard him say, "You were more obedient before." My blood froze. I took a deep breath. I said that my mother was waiting, that we had to finish quickly. He laughed, a low, debauched laugh that I can still hear when I close my eyes. But he didn't do anything else. He just stared at me, a look that took the air out of my lungs, and that stayed in my head all day. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it, as if he was marking me, reminding me that silence had a price. A few days later, my teacher called my mother at school. She said that my grades had dropped, that I was distracted with lost eyes. My mother was worried. She lectured me at home and asked if anyone was bothering me. I shook my head, denying it, and she cried. She said she was doing the best she could, that life was hard enough, and that she needed me to be strong. Hearing that killed me a little inside, because she had no idea of the war I was fighting alone every day. There was one night when I woke up startled. I smelled something familiar, and when I opened my eyes, he was standing in the doorway again, just staring. He didn't move, just watching, like an ancient figure that feeds on the fear of others. I sat up, hugged the pillow, and didn't blink. After a while, he turned and disappeared down the corridor. The next day, he acted normally. He offered me cereal for breakfast as if he were the most loving grandfather in the world. And my mother laughed at his antics. As always, the weeks went by. I was counting down the hours to go to school, the only place where I could breathe, even if it was halfway. And even there, I began to distance myself from my friends. I didn't want anyone to get close. I felt dirty, wrong. I was angry with my body, my reactions, the memories. I even avoided looking in the mirror, because when I did, I saw him. I saw his gaze passing through me as if he were still there. One afternoon, it rained heavily. The lights went out. The house was plunged into a silent gloom. I was in my room, my heart pounding, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I knew who it was, his labored breathing, the sound of his slippers. Everything told me it was him. But this time, my mother showed up. She asked if I was all right, brought a candle, sat with me until the lights came back on. And then, he was gone, as if her presence had broken the spell. I thanked her silently, but didn't say anything, because I still couldn't. Little by little, I began to notice something that gave me strength. He was slowing down. Age was finally beginning to take its toll. He wasn't walking as steadily anymore. He was forgetting real words. His hands were shaking. And that's when I started thinking about things I hadn't even considered before. No more running away, but reacting. Because I knew he wasn't going to stop. He was just waiting for the right time. One day, I saw my mother crying alone in the kitchen. I thought it was because of my father, who hardly stopped by the house anymore. But she said something that struck me. There are some things you don't understand until it's too late, Helen, and then it becomes a scar. I didn't know what to say, but at that moment I understood that she was also carrying silent things. Maybe not the same, but similar scars. The end of that month was strange. He was in bed for a few days with a fever. My mother looked after him lovingly, and I pretended to care too. But inside me, something urged him not to get up again, and that made me feel guilty, guilt for wishing for someone's demise. But at the same time, I thought, who's going to save me if he gets better? On the last night before he recovered, I went into his room slowly just to see if he was really asleep. He was. He was breathing heavily, sweating. I looked at him from a distance, and for a moment I saw only a sick, frail old man. But then he whispered my name, asleep, as if he wanted to chase me even in his dreams. I ran out of there and spent the night with my eyes open, waiting for daylight. When the sun came up, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait any longer. I wasn't going to keep quiet any longer. But before I told anyone, I needed to understand what was wrong with him. And to do that, I was going to poke around where no one had the courage. It took me a few days to gather my courage, but when I did, there was no turning back. I waited for my mother to leave with a huge list of things from the market. My father was in the yard, tinkering with the old truck that kept breaking down, and the old man was asleep in his armchair, mumbling slurred noises, wrapped in a green blanket full of polka dots. My fingers were shaking, but I knew what I was going to do. I went to the room where he kept his old things, the same room where we'd gone through the boxes. Now I was really going to look at everything, not as a granddaughter, but as someone looking for answers. The room smelled of old paper and damp wood. I pushed one of the boxes aside and saw a suitcase, one of those old dark leather ones with a worn metal zipper. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I searched for the key in the drawers around it, in the button jars, until I found a small key attached by a rubber band to a yellowed envelope with his name handwritten on it. I opened it slowly. My heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to want to scream before I did. Inside the bag was a pile of loose paper, some photos, some notes written in shaky handwriting. There was an old work permit, some letters that didn't make much sense, but what caught my eye was a notebook. A blue cover, worn at the corners, and his name written in ballpoint pen. I opened it carefully. The first few pages were scribbles, accounts, dates. But later on, the text became different. He wrote as if he was talking to someone. "She understands, she feels, she accepts," he said on one line. In another, he wrote, "She's been mine since the day she looked me in the eye." The sentences had no context, but the way they were written, they were too intimate. They hinted at something that made me want to vomit. I read on, not breathing properly. "The night gives me courage," he wrote. "During the day, I'm just another forgotten old man, but at night I am what I want to be." I shut the notebook tightly. My stomach churned. I shivered, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of confirmation, as if everything I'd been carrying up until then, without a name, without a form, had suddenly taken shape. I heard a noise in the living room and almost dropped everything. I put the papers away anyway and closed the suitcase. I left the room trying to look normal. He hadn't moved. He was still asleep with his head tilted to one side and his mouth ajar. I walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, but inside I wanted to scream at the world. That night, I lay with the notebook hidden under the mattress. I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I closed my eyelids, I imagined him getting up, coming down the corridor with that dragging gait, as if he owned the house, the night, and my fear. When morning came, I decided to tell him, but not to my mother. Not yet. I went to school, waited for my teacher to finish her lesson, and asked to talk. Just the two of us. At first, I got stuck. I tried to explain, but the words came out garbled. She looked at me so calmly that I almost cried. She said I could trust her. So I handed her the notebook. I asked her to read it. She leafed through it carefully, without rushing. When she looked up, I saw something I'd never seen in any adult: anger. But it was a quiet, contained anger, the kind that makes you realize that someone has finally believed. She asked if I wanted help. I shook my head slowly. She gave me time to breathe. She said she was going to talk to someone, but that I didn't need to be afraid. Of course, it wasn't that simple. In my head, everything could go wrong. I had this feeling that if anyone knew, the world would collapse. But part of me really wanted it to collapse. For someone to break down the walls of my house with their bare hands and get that old man out at once. 2 days later, my mother showed up at school. She called me into the corner, her eyes swollen as if she had been crying nonstop. I froze on the spot. She held my hand and asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" I couldn't answer. I just lowered my head. And she cried right there, in front of the other parents, the teachers, as if she had been hit in the soul. On the way home, she didn't say anything. She drove quietly, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. When we arrived, he wasn't there. He said he'd gone to buy a newspaper, as he did every Thursday. I went straight to my room, afraid of what would come, but the silence in the house was scarier than any screams. In the evening, my mother came into the room with an envelope. Inside were the letters, the notebook, everything I had hidden. She said she'd found it in the bedroom when she was looking for my sneakers. She looked me in the eye and apologized. An apology so sincere that it made me cry for the first time in months. She said she didn't know, that she never imagined it, that now she was going to do the right thing. And I wanted to believe her, even if I didn't know what that right was. That night, he didn't come home. And for the first time, I slept with the door open, without my stomach turning. But the fear was still there, as if it had taken root. The next day, my mother called the police. They asked questions, took the notebook, and went after him. But they found nothing, not even him, no clue. He disappeared like smoke. And that's when I discovered that my hell was far from over. Because sometimes, the problem isn't that the monster is gone. It's that it knows too much. He knows where we live, what we fear, and what he can do if he wants to come back. The week he disappeared, the house looked like another place. My mother walked around with red eyes, but a lighter body, as if something invisible had been lifted from her back. She didn't talk much. She did the day's chores automatically, avoided any long conversations, but hugged me every night before bed, as if trying to protect me with her thin, tired arms. I didn't complain. That was all I had wanted since I was a little girl. At school, things started to change. The teacher began to look at me with a new care, without pity, but with firmness. She gave me space, but also didn't leave me alone too much. Little by little, I started talking to one classmate or another again. And it was only then that I realized how much I had distanced myself from everyone. It was as if I was coming back to life after a long time in a dark room. But even without him, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, as if I'd heard footsteps. I'd run to the corridor, look around, check the doors. Everything was locked. But inside me, it was as if it was still open, as if he had left a part of himself inside the house. A smell, a whisper, a shadow. My mother started going to therapy. She said she needed to understand some things. At first, I thought it was strange. I'd never heard her talk about these things. But then I realized it was important. She came back from the sessions different, more aware, more serious, and sometimes sadder too. But a sadness that came with understanding. That gave me hope, because deep down, I still wanted her around. I still wanted her to see me as she never had before. A few days later, a letter arrived. No sender. My mother opened it in the kitchen and went pale. She folded it quickly, put it in the drawer, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. I asked. She said it was nothing, that it was a mistake, but the way her hand was shaking said something else. I got worried. That night, when she went to shower, I went to the drawer. I opened it slowly. The letter was there, folded in 4. I read just one sentence. Don't think it's over. I felt a chill in my stomach that almost knocked me over. I went back to my room in silence. I lay down on the bed, hugged the pillow, and closed my eyes as if that would stop the world from coming in. My mother said nothing more about the letter, but he started looking out of the window more often. He locked the doors twice. He checked the garage every night, and that told me more than any words. At school, I had a nightmare at break time. I nodded off with my head on my desk and dreamt that he was back. Not like before, but worse. Older, quieter, crueler. I woke up panting, my face wet with sweat. The teacher took me to the infirmary. She said I needed to rest, offered me some juice, and gave me a tissue. But inside me, nothing calmed down. It was as if I had been warned. The next few days were tense. The police had no news. They said he could have gone to another state, changed his name, disappeared on his own. But their tone was that of someone who had already given up, as if he was just another old man on the run. But for me, he wasn't. I knew him. I knew what he was capable of. He didn't run away. He hid to attack better. One evening, my mother called me for dinner. She was tense, but trying to keep to the routine. She put my food on my plate, sat down at the table, and out of the blue started talking about her childhood. She told of when her father would disappear for days and come back pretending nothing had happened. She told me about an uncle who everyone said was weird, but who no one had ever confronted. And I realized, right there, that she also had scars that she never showed, perhaps out of shame, perhaps because, like me, she learned early on that certain pains cannot be spoken aloud. After that dinner, we got closer in a strange way. We didn't talk directly about the past, but there was a silent understanding between us. A silence that didn't hurt, but that I recognized, and that, for a while, gave me a false sense of security. Then another letter arrived. This time, they left it at the gate. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper in shaky handwriting. She's still mine. My mother almost fainted when she read it. She called the police again, but no one saw who left it. No camera, no neighbors, no clues. Just the paper, the phrase, and the fear coming back with force. We were locked in the house for days. My father, who until then had been absent, decided to show up more. He said he would take care of us, but it was too late for me. I looked at him and saw only the silence of all those years, the omission, the absence, the neglect. He could even try now, but I had already learned to protect myself. One rainy morning, my mother woke me up early. She said we were going away for a few days, her friend's house far away. We took a few clothes and documents and left almost without speaking. On the way, she kept the radio on loud, as if the noise would fill the fear. I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I felt like I was being ripped away from myself. We arrived at a small, simple, but cozy place. Her friend welcomed us warmly. She said it was only for a few days, that we would be safe there, and I tried to believe it. But that first night, as I lay in my new bed smelling of fresh soap, I heard footsteps again. They weren't real. It was my head, but they seemed too real. I woke up startled with his image on the doorstep. I took a deep breath, wet my face, and went back to bed. I told myself that he didn't know where we were, that we were far away, but my heart didn't believe me because he was the type to wait, who watched, who never forgot. And that, my dear, is why I'm telling you. His disappearance wasn't the end. It was just the break. The first week at my mother's friend's house was a mixture of relief and constant alertness. On the outside, everything seemed calm. The woman was kind, didn't ask too many questions, just said we were safe there. The house smelled of cake baking and the walls seemed to whisper peace. But inside me, nothing was quiet. It was as if the past had stuck to my skin and wouldn't let go. Even away from my bed in the old hallway of our house, I kept waking up at night with the same feeling that someone was watching me. My mother tried to act normally, but her tension was evident. Every time the phone rang, she froze. It took her a long time to answer, and then she'd stay silent for hours, as if she was chewing on some worry she didn't know how to spit out. I noticed everything, but I didn't ask, because part of me still didn't know how to deal with this new mother, more present, more protective, but still full of silences. During the day, I helped with small tasks. I washed dishes, organized clothes, read books borrowed from the living room shelf. I tried to occupy my mind. Sometimes I wrote in my new notebook, different from the one I handed in at school. This was mine alone. No one else could read it. There, I put everything I felt. I wrote as if I were talking to someone who would never judge me. It was my way of breathing when the air seemed trapped inside my chest. One cloudy afternoon, we went to the grocery store in the neighboring town. My mother wanted to buy some things. We went into the store, and while she picked out the items, I stood near the sweet display case. That's when I saw, in the reflection of the glass, a man standing on the other side of the street. He had the same posture, the same way of holding his hands crossed in front of his body. My heart raced. I turned quickly to get a real look, but he had already gone, or perhaps he had never been there. Even so, my body went on alert as if it were in danger. I went back into the store and didn't say anything. My mother noticed that something had changed on my face. She asked if I was okay. I nodded, unable to say a word. On the way home, I kept looking out of the car window. I expected to see that figure again. I felt like something was following me. It wasn't paranoia. It was a living, pulsating memory. I tried to tell my mother, but my throat closed up every time I tried to speak, as if the part of me that knew what fear was afraid again. Over the next few nights, I started sleeping with the light on. My mother's friend thought it was strange at first, but didn't say anything. She knew there was something broken there and had the decency not to touch it. Sometimes she came into the room with a cup of hot tea and stayed with me in silence. That helped more than any words, because there's pain that doesn't need to be explained, only recognized. Time passed slowly. The simple routine helped keep my mind occupied, but nothing seemed to be enough to cure what was building up inside me. A mixture of anger, sadness, and a sense of injustice that made me want to scream. I began to think more about the old notebook, the words he wrote, the dirty phrases he used as if they were poetry, and it made me shudder with disgust, because he believed he had the right, that he could do it and get away with it. And what's worse, for years, he did. One morning, my mother received a phone call. She answered in the hallway, far from my ears, but I could hear the tone of her voice changing. Something between panic and restrained despair. When she hung up, she came into the room where I was, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at me. For a while, I thought she wasn't going to say anything. Then, he said they had news. that someone had seen him in a town not far away. An acquaintance from the local police thought he recognized the description, but they weren't sure yet. She tried to calm me down, said they were investigating, that we were protected. But the truth is that just hearing that he might be nearby sent my body back into the same state of terror as before. I spent the next few days with my stomach in knots. I didn't eat properly, I didn't talk much. All I could think about was him standing nearby, watching, waiting. My mother asked us to pray together before bed. I closed my eyes, but I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted it to end, for someone to assure me that I would never have to look over my shoulder again. The following week, we were called to give more information at a nearby police station. The journey was tense. The road seemed longer than usual. My mother drove with her hands gripping the steering wheel, and I stared out of the window, trying to memorize every tree, every curve, as if that was going to protect me from something. At the police station, the officers asked questions about what I remembered, about the details. I answered what I could. I tried not to cry, but a few tears came out anyway. One of the investigators was different from the others. He looked at me seriously, but without that air of superiority that adults usually have with children. He said I was strong, that they had already sent a request to widen the search. I wasn't fooled by this. I'd already learned that promises don't always come true. We returned home at the end of the day, exhausted. My mother's friend was waiting for us with hot food. We sat at the table in silence. We ate slowly. Then I went to my room and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything I had lived through, everything he took from me, every moment that I should have been just a child, and I wasn't. I felt anger like I'd never felt before, a silent rage that burned inside without making a sound. That night, I took out my new notebook and wrote a sentence that I've never forgotten. If he doesn't show up, he'll haunt me forever. But if he does, it might be worse. I was doing the dishes when he showed up. It wasn't even the kind of encounter that happens with a soundtrack or thunder. It was dry, in a hurry, like everything else with him. My mother had gone out with her friend to sort things out in town. I stayed at home, saying I wanted to rest. It had been a tiring morning, and I just wanted some peace. I remember the radio was playing some old song, hot water running from the tap, the smell of soap, the sun coming in a little shyly through the kitchen window. Then I heard the door handle turning. At first, I thought it was my friend coming back. I said her name out loud without turning around. No answer. If that was all I'd heard, I might not have stopped. But when I turned and saw his silhouette in the doorway, my body froze. It was him, thinner, with a thin beard, his eyes even deeper. But it was him, alive, flesh, bone, and poison. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. He looked at me with the same way that made me nauseous. His head tilted slightly as if he was analyzing my reaction, as if he expected me to run or scream. Only I didn't run, and I didn't scream. I stood there, my hand wet, my plate still in my other hand, feeling the ground disappear beneath me. He took a step, slowly, as he always did. He said my name, low, almost affectionate, as if it was all normal, as if we had met by chance after years, and now it was time to catch up. His mouth moved, but all I heard was the echo of years of forced silence, of stolen nights, of words no one ever wanted to hear. I took a step back. Without taking my eyes off him, I tried to find my cell phone key on the counter, but my hand was shaking so badly that I dropped the glass. The noise seemed to wake something up inside me. He stopped. He just stood there, looking at me. And then he said, as if nothing had happened, "I wanted to see you." The phrase made me want to, because it wasn't just seeing. It was never just that, and he knew it. I don't remember how I managed to run. All I know is that I was suddenly locked in my room with my breath hitching in my chest and the sound of his footsteps retreating. I called my mother. I said a few words. "He's here." She understood. She asked me to stay locked up, that she was going to call for help. And she hung up. The next few minutes seemed like hours. I stood behind the door with my chair leaning against it, as if that could stop anything. I listened to the sounds of the house, trying to guess if he was still there, if he had left, if he was just waiting for the right time to come back. When the police arrived, I didn't even have to open my mouth. My mother's friend had already told them everything. They searched the house, looked around, and found nothing. He was gone again, as he always did. My mother arrived next. She hugged me so tightly I thought she was going to break my ribs. For the first time, she cried in front of me without trying to disguise it. And in her tears, I saw everything she had never been able to say. I saw the weight of the guilt, the fear, the powerlessness, and I didn't cry, because at that moment, there was no room for any more tears. Only an unbearable desire to end it. The following days were agonizing. The police said they were going to step up the search, that now they were sure it was him. They asked us not to go out alone. They reinforced the security of the house, but that was just paper. I knew that if he wanted to, he would come back, and that nothing would stop him, because that's what he did. He came in and out of my life as he pleased, taking pieces that I would never get back. That's when I made a decision. If he came back, I wasn't going to run or hide. I was tired of being held hostage, tired of living, waiting for the next scare. I took out one of his old notebooks and started to reread everything. Every sentence of his, every word written with that false delicacy. And I wrote over it. I crossed out, corrected, answered, as if I was finally talking to him, but this time with my voice, not with the silence imposed by him. My mother noticed that something had changed in me. She asked if I wanted to go back home, to the city. She said it might be time. I said no, not while he was on the loose. She understood. She didn't agree completely, but she respected it. For the first time, she listened without trying to silence my pain. I started walking with a small spray bottle in my bag, a present from my mother's friend who said that it's always good to have something handy. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of control, even if it was only symbolic. At night, I slept with my heart alert. Any noise made me sit up in bed, but now I no longer hid. I looked into the dark and thought, if it's today, then so be it, because that's enough. He reappeared 2 weeks later, but not in the way you imagine. And my goodness, that's when everything began to turn around for good. It was a late afternoon, cloudy skies, the smell of rain in the air. My mother had gone out to get some bread, something simple. Her friend was in the backyard tending to the plants. I stayed in the living room, reading some book, trying to distract my mind. I was sitting on the sofa with my feet tucked up when I felt that chill that doesn't come from the cold. A feeling. I got up, went to the window, and looked out onto the street. Nothing. I went back, but the discomfort didn't go away. A few minutes later, I heard the gate slam. I went into the kitchen, called for my mother's friend. No answer. The sound of the gate repeated itself, now more slowly. My feet froze. It wasn't normal. I walked down the corridor, my heart wanting to burst out of my mouth. When I got close to the back door, I saw the handle turn slowly, a smooth, calculated movement. I ran before it opened all the way. I locked it. I shouted the woman's name again. Nothing. I ran back to the living room. I grabbed my cell phone. I tried to call. No signal, no network. I looked out of the window once more. And there he was, across the street, standing still, with a plastic bag in one hand and an umbrella in the other. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't making any gestures. He just stared at me as if it were the most natural moment in the world, as if nothing was out of place. I moved away from the window, took a deep breath, and tried to think. I went to the bedroom, got the spray, hid it in my pocket. I walked back slowly, not knowing what to expect. When I looked again, he had crossed over. Now he was on the sidewalk, a few steps from the gate. He stared at the ground as if he was waiting for someone to open it. My mother's friend appeared at that moment, coming from the yard, her hands dirty with dirt. She saw me pale and ran over to me. I pointed to the street. When she looked, he was gone. She ran into the street, called out, searched. Nobody saw him, not a living soul around. She came back panting, hugged me, said we were going to get out of there. Again. It wasn't safe anymore. I agreed. I didn't argue. I was tired of changing, but even more tired of living in this cycle, of running away without really being able to escape. My mother arrived soon after. She turned white when she heard what had happened. She called the police. She told them everything. They said they were going to increase their patrols, send someone on duty. But deep down, I knew that he never left any traces because he knew the paths. He knew where to step. He knew who we were. And worse, he knew how to take us apart. That night, no one slept. The three of us stayed in the living room with the TV on just to disguise our fear. None of us said much. Each of us locked in our own memories, our own mistakes, our own guilt. And that was what hurt the most. Because what he did wasn't enough. The greatest damage was everything he left behind, even after he left. We decided to go to another city, somewhere further away where he might not find us. We packed in a hurry, just the essentials. We left our friend's house with silent thanks and hugs. We hit the road the next day without telling anyone, as if we were running away from something invisible. And in a way it was, because he was more than just a body. He was a presence. He was a constant threat, a living ghost. The new place was smaller, more isolated. We borrowed a small house from a distant acquaintance. My mother got a quick job doing laundry outside. I went back to school trying to fit in with the unfamiliar faces. But fear walked with me like a shadow, and every time the door creaked or a strange man walked by on the sidewalk, my stomach turned to stone. I started writing every day, not to remember, but not to forget that it was real, that I had survived, that somehow I was here. The words held me up. They gave me ground when everything seemed to be slipping away. I wrote letters that I never sent, to him, to my mother, to myself, saying everything I never could, and that for a while kept me alive inside, until a letter arrived. No sender, just my name, written in familiar handwriting, shaky, faint, but unmistakable. Inside, a note. If you thought you could hide, you were wrong. My mother tore up the paper as soon as she read it. She called the police. They handed it over to forensics. But deep down, we knew nothing would come of it. He always escaped. I always knew where to find him. That's when I decided I wasn't going to run away anymore. If he wanted to show up, let him. But this time, I was going to find someone who was no longer the scared little girl, who was no longer going to close the door trembling, who had a name, a voice, and now also courage. I started writing everything down in a new notebook, but not for me, so that someone, one day if they needed to, would know, and maybe that's where the story changes. Not because he stopped, but because I changed. After that last letter, we stopped fooling each other. There was no safe place, no corner in the world where he couldn't get to, because he wasn't just a person. He was a hole in time, a mark on the skin, an echo that kept repeating itself. So from that day on, my mother slept on the sofa in the living room, with the phone nearby, a screwdriver on the corner table. I knew it was more symbolic than effective, but it gave me some sense of protection. At the new school, I tried to remain invisible. I didn't want to be friends. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to spend my days without anyone touching me. The teachers understood my silence. Some knew part of the story. Others just sensed that something was broken. They never pressured me, and that, in a way, was what I needed most. I spent my afternoons writing. With each page, I felt the anger turn into a kind of breath. I began to describe everything down to the smallest detail, not to relive it, but to exercise it. I tried to draw too, but my hand was shaking too much. So I went back to the notebook, which didn't require me to be firm, just present. In it, I began to plan. Not a plan like you see in movies. It was something simple, a way of not being caught off guard once again. My mother divided herself between work and home. She was thinner, more closed off. She seemed to be calculating risks all the time. She no longer smiled easily. We talked little, but there was a respect between us, a silent pact of survival. Each of us in our own way carried the weight of that man, And what united us now was this shared pain. One cold night, the phone rang. It was the police station. They had found a man with the same characteristics walking near the bus station in a town a few hours away. When he was taken for investigation, he denied everything. He was using false documents. They said he seemed disoriented but lucid enough to refuse to answer. They asked my mother to go there. She said she couldn't. She asked me if I wanted to go. I said yes. The journey was long and silent. The policeman who took us tried to strike up a conversation at first, but gave up when he realized there would be no talking. I stared out of the window, counting the license plates, feeling my hands sweat. When we arrived, I went straight to the room where he was being held. We didn't go in together. I went in first. They wanted to see if I could recognize him without interference. He was sitting, hands folded on the table, eyes on the floor. Older, more bent over. But it was him. Every detail, from the way he breathed to the way he moved his fingers. When he saw me, he raised his eyes slowly. He showed no surprise. He just watched, as he always did. I kept my posture. I stood up straight. I didn't move closer. He opened his mouth to say something, but I was quicker. I said that all it took was one gesture from him for everything to start again. But this time, I wasn't the same. I went back to the next room, signed the papers, confirmed his identity. He would be transferred. He would be tried. The police said they now had enough material, with the evidence, the reports, and the notebook. But inside me, I knew that didn't mean the end, because what he had caused wouldn't end with handcuffs. His arrest wouldn't wipe away what remained. In the car on the way back, my mother held my hand. She didn't say anything, and it was better that way. It was the first physical contact between us since it all began. Her skin warm, mine cold, but together, for the first time. After that day, they started calling me to give depositions, hearings, more questions. It was tiring, but I went. Every time I repeated the story, a piece of it hurt less, because now I was listened to, written down, taken seriously. Even so, each word hurt as if it were the first time. Returning home was always difficult. With each return, the silence weighed heavy. My mother tried to maintain the routine, but she couldn't. She started missing work and lost some clients. One day, she came home and said she needed to get away from it all. She wanted to go to another state, start from scratch. He asked me if I'd agree to it. I said yes, but I asked for some time off. There were things I still needed to do. I went back to school and told a teacher I trusted. I told her I'd be leaving soon. She hugged me and gave me an envelope with letters from her classmates, messages that I never knew were being written. Sweet, supportive, caring words. I read each one slowly, my eyes watering. It showed me that even when you hide, there are people watching. The last night in that city was windy. I closed my suitcase calmly, looked around the empty room, and touched the wall as if to say goodbye. I lay down with my notebook on my lap and wrote, "He may never leave my head, but now he no longer commands my actions." In the morning, we left, without a fuss, without telling anyone. Just the two of us on the road, looking for any place where the past wouldn't weigh so heavily. The car drove slowly. My mother drove with focus. I looked at the landscape, trying to memorize everything, as if it were the first time I'd seen the world. The new place was small, even quieter than the previous one. A town almost forgotten on the map, with cobbled streets and the constant smell of wet bushes. The house we got was borrowed from one of my mother's distant cousins. It was a 2-bedroom house with a dirt floor, but it was clean, quiet, and for the first time in a long time, there were no memories stuck to the walls. For the first few days, I tried to believe that this was a fresh start. I woke up early, walked a little along the dirt road, and watched the people. There were few. The neighbors waved, curious but respectful of the silence. My mother got a job helping out in a grocery store, cleaning the stock, packing groceries. She came back tired, but with a lighter look on her face. It seemed that, at last, there was room to breathe. I went to the local school, a small classroom with only a few pupils. Nobody asked many questions, and that comforted me. I managed to keep enough distance so that I didn't have to make up any stories. All I needed was the notebook I carried around with me every day, kept in my backpack as if it were a piece of my body. In it, I kept writing down everything that came to mind, especially the memories that insisted on appearing in the quietest hours. One afternoon, on my way home from school, an older woman stopped me on the corner. She asked if I was Raymond Carter's granddaughter. My blood ran cold. It was the first time anyone had said his name out loud after everything. I asked who she was. She said that she had met him when she lived in Alabama many years before, and that she thought he had already died. I told her, with a dry mouth, that he was in jail. The woman blessed herself, lowered her eyes, and just said, "He was a strange man." She went on her way without looking back. That night, I had a nightmare that seemed more real than any memory. I was in the old house, the one in Mobile, the dark corridor, the bedroom door ajar, and he was standing there again. I woke up with my face drenched in sweat, shaking. My mother came running, thinking it was a fever. I told her it was just a dream, but her eyes understood more than words could. Over the next few days, I tried to occupy my mind with reading, small drawings, long walks near an abandoned train track. There, sitting on the tracks, I wrote the sentence that never left my head. He may be locked away, but he still screams inside me, because that's exactly what it was. Even though he was far away, even though he was locked up, even though he had no news, he still appeared when the silence lasted too long. My mother noticed my gloom. She started suggesting therapy. She said that a local social worker could help. At first, I denied it. I said I was fine, that I just needed time. But inside, I knew I was lying. The fear wasn't of speaking, it was of listening, of having to hear my own story in different words. I gave in. I went into the small room with the smell of weak coffee and old furniture. The woman who welcomed me was young, with a calm manner. She didn't talk much, but she listened with a look that didn't hurry. It took me weeks to say anything relevant. I kept standing there, changing the subject, deflecting, until the day she asked me, "Do you want justice or peace?" The question was on my mind for days, because I had never thought of it as a choice. I always thought the two came together, but at that moment I realized they didn't. I began to count, little by little. His name, the sentences he wrote, the moments he took away from me, the nights that marked me. She listened without looking, pitying without interrupting. She just let me talk, and that was all I needed. Someone who would listen without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. After a few sessions, she suggested I write a letter, not to send, just to empty. It took me days, but I wrote it. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't explain anything. I just put down everything that was stuck. I wrote about the clothes I threw away because they reminded me of him, about the smells I avoided, about the fear of the dark that never went away. And when I'd finished, I tore it into small pieces and burned it. It was symbolic, yes, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for wishing it had never existed. My mother was still trying to adjust. She had good days, others not so good. One evening, talking quietly, she said she was thinking of going back to church. She wanted to find some kind of solace. I didn't reply, but I understood. Everyone looks for healing where they can. Our faith, even though bruised, was still one of the few things he hadn't managed to take away. The school ended the semester with a small ceremony. I went. I stayed at the back, watching. A teacher called me up at the end, handed me a diploma, and said that I had been an example of overcoming. I smiled politely, but inside I knew that overcoming wasn't a finish line. It was a daily struggle, and that day, just by not collapsing again, that was a victory. But all this, my dear, was not yet the end, because the hardest thing wasn't that he came back. It was finding out what he left behind before disappearing from our lives for good. It happened one morning, one of those mornings when you think it's just going to be another ordinary day. I woke up early, as usual, with the dim light coming in through the crack in the window. My mother had already left for work, so I was alone, enjoying the silence of the house. I made myself a coffee and sat on the balcony with my notebook on my lap trying to write. But that day, nothing came. My head felt heavy, as if something was circling around me with no name. I decided to tidy up the closet. The house was small and any mess seemed to grow. While I was folding some old clothes, I found a cardboard box at the bottom, the kind you keep without remembering why. I opened it out of curiosity. Inside, apart from some loose papers and forgotten objects, there was a brown envelope with my name handwritten on it. The handwriting was recognizable, even shaky, even badly drawn. It was his. I almost dropped it. It took me a while to open it. I sat there on the floor, looking at the paper as if it were a trap. But curiosity won out. I broke the edge slowly with my heart racing. Inside, there were a few sheets of writing. No greeting, no date, just loose words, as if they were thoughts thrown in. He talked about me, about the time he had spent with us, as if he were telling a story in which he was the protagonist of a good thing. He said he loved me the way he knew how, that I had been the light of his old age. He used sweet words, soiled with intent, as if he was trying to justify the unforgivable with crooked poetry. It made me sick, but I kept reading. I needed to understand. I wanted to know how far he was going with this madness. And it was in one of the last sentences that it all came crashing down. I haven't told anyone about what I left in the little room in the old house. I thought it was better that way. Some things are ours. My whole body froze. I threw the envelope on the floor, took a deep breath, and tried to think. I spent the rest of the day restless. That sentence kept running through my head. What would he have left? Why talk about it now? What could still exist in that place? I called my mother and asked if she still had access to the old house. She said yes, that the property was closed, but it was still in the name of an aunt who lived far away. I asked us to go there. I didn't explain why. She hesitated, but agreed. The following weekend, we took the bus. The journey was long and tense. The memories crashed like waves. Every bit of the road took me back to my stolen childhood. When we arrived, the house looked the same. The gate creaked, the paint peeled, the smell of mold as soon as the door opened. We entered slowly. Each room brought a forgotten scene. The floor still crackled in the same places. The room seemed smaller than I remembered, but the fear, that was just as big. I went straight to the back room, the same room where he kept his junk, where that notebook had been found. I opened the door with a sweaty hand. The smell of dust and abandonment hit me like a punch. I looked around carefully. In the corner, behind a leaning cupboard, I found a small wooden box locked with an old padlock. My mother appeared at the door just then and asked what I was looking for. I showed her the box. She didn't say anything. She just helped me carry it into the living room. We tried to open it with an old key we found in a tin of nails. It worked. Inside the box, papers, letters, photos, objects that seemed to belong to various people. Some letters were addressed to names I didn't recognize. Others had no addressee, but they all had the same tone, a mixture of confession, delirium, and pride, as if he had built a private shrine to his own perversion. The most shocking thing was finding a photo of me, about 7 years old, glued to a piece of paper with the words, "She was only mine." My body went cold. My mother took the photo, tore it up without thinking twice, and hugged me like she had never done before. We stood there in the middle of the room in silence, feeling the weight of everything we didn't even know existed. I took that box to the police station. We handed everything over. The investigators thanked me, said that it reinforced what had already been said, but that the trial would still take a while. And once again, I left with the feeling that the system is too slow for someone who needs to breathe again. We returned to our new home quietly, each of us immersed in our own thoughts. I knew that after that day, none of us would ever be the same, because even in prison, even far away, he was still capable of leaving clues, of planting poison, of making us bleed inside. That night, I wrote in my old notebook for the last time. Now I know the extent of the damage, But I also know that I survived, not because I was strong, but because he never managed to erase me completely. And honey, there's just one thing left for you to understand how it all ends. Because however it may seem, there's still one last piece that needs to be told. After I handed the box over to the police, the silence became thicker at home. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that weighs you down. A silence that sticks to the walls, the skin, the days. My mother spoke even less. She lived on automatic. She left early and came back late, her eyes dry and her shoulders bowed as if she were carrying the world. I didn't charge her. I knew that each of us had our own way of dealing with the cracks. She chose silence. I chose writing. His trial began months later. We weren't called to testify again. They had enough. Witnesses came forward. People no one could have imagined. Older women, old neighbors, people from other towns. They spoke his name with the same pain on their faces. Some cried, others trembled. None smiled. It was the first time I saw what he had done reflected in other voices, and that gave me a strange kind of consolation. I wasn't the only one. I never was. Only back then, no one listened. The sentence came on a gray day, fine rain, low sky, convicted of multiple crimes, years in prison, which, given his age, meant the end. My mother read the news on a website and just shook her head. She didn't celebrate. She didn't say, "Thank God." She just closed the screen and went back to folding the clothes. And I understood. Because it wasn't victory. It was just a pause. A period that came too late to repair the damage. Months later, we received the news that he had died. A heart attack, they said. Alone. No relatives, no friends, no one to watch over his body. The state took care of everything. A simple burial with no name on the headstone. When my mother told me, I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness. Just an emptiness. As if that hole inside me, which he had helped to dig, had stabilized. It was still there, but it wasn't growing anymore. I started dreaming about him less often. He still came sometimes, but without the strength of before. Without that suffocating presence. It was more like a distorted memory, a distant echo that you hear but no longer obey. I've learned to recognize the triggers, the smells, the words, the sounds. I've learned to protect myself from them, not completely, but enough to keep going. Over time, I started visiting schools, talking to girls. I didn't give details, I didn't tell names, but I said what needed to be said, that silence also kills, that listening can save someone, and that there are wounds that don't go away, but stop bleeding. They listened attentively. Some came afterwards and told me things that nobody else knew, and I listened, just as I once needed someone to listen. My mother aged quickly after all that. Her hair turned white for good, her skin lost its radiance, but her eyes did change. They were no longer the same lost eyes as before. They carried pain, of course, but also regret, and over time, a strange kind of peace. She learned to pray again. He went back to church, slowly. And even if I didn't follow the same path, I respected it, because she found a way. Today, at 76, I look back without romanticizing anything. I won't say that all this has made me stronger. This talk about pain making us stronger is a lie from someone who has never had to survive by swallowing their tears. What I can say is that, even though I was broken, I didn't fall apart. I carried on, out of stubbornness, instinct, and perhaps luck. Some days I still wake up with the weight of the past pressing down on my chest. There are others when I can breathe without pain. I've learned to cope, not with perfection, but with resistance. I never had justice in the beautiful sense of the word, but I had a voice, and that for me is worth more than any sentence. I end this story by looking at you, who have listened to me this far, and I ask only one thing. Don't ignore the silence of a child, because it was in that silence that he dominated me, and it was by breaking that silence that I finally became my own person again. If you've made it this far, please leave a like, because digging it all up cost me a piece of my soul. but at least now no one can say they don't know.